So in this video, I'm going to make the argument that Russia is weaker than we thought. I took some notes and I'm going to refer to that periodically. Um, they're weaker militarily, economically, politically, systemically, and culturally. And then that means that practically speaking, they're not able to press against the Ukrainians like they thought they were going to be. We'll start with militarily. Remember how Russia was supposed to be the world's second army? They kind of pants themselves. Like, they really have not shown the power that everyone thought they had. Like before the war, they seemed so much bigger than they are now. And they were supposed to take things in 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever it was. But they thought it was going to be a very quick war or they wouldn't have done this. And then 2.5 years later, here we are, where they're still not able to really press their military advantage. And everybody sees that they have a military advantage. They really do have a military advantage over the Ukrainians. They're outnumbered. The Ukrainians are outnumbered both in manpower and in munitions, and it's yet the Russians still haven't been able to win. Now, their nuclear power is not helping them. They have nukes, but they really can't use them. I mean, they'll be a pariah in the international community for decades to come if they use that. So their great advantage, they can't actually use. Okay, so that's militarily not that strong. And there's corruption within the military as well that has hollowed it out to a point where they thought that even they thought that they were tougher than they were. We'll come to that in just a little bit. Okay, economically. Economically, okay, the interest rate's now at 18%, and this is as of late July, and that's very bad. The wealth fund is been wound down. They can't sell their oil except at such exorbitantly low rates to India and Brazil that they're barely making a profit from anything that they're selling there. They can't afford to lose, but they can't afford to win. I got this from Joe Blogs the other day. About 2 weeks ago, he put this video out. So if Russia loses, now they have reparations and they can't afford that. And if they win, now they can't afford to rebuild parts of Ukraine that they have taken over. And let's say that they forego building parts of Ukraine that they just leave it there. They could possibly do that, but if they did that, they still have another problem, and that is that they've shifted their industry from selling goods and services to something very different where they're on a war footing and just doing whatever the government wants. So they don't have the same customer base, and a lot of industry will go out of business, and that could lead to an economic collapse. So economically, they're in very, very bad shape. They also have sanctions that are hurting them significantly, where they can't get the parts. So when planes are hurt, they have to scavenge every last little part that they can out of the plane. They can't get new parts. They've also have a big problem where they're not building things. Like they have an economy that's not really that productive. It's mostly, like John McCain talked about, a glorified gas station. Okay, so that's economically, they're weaker than we thought. Politically, they're weaker than we thought. Who does Russia pal around with? Like, your mom told you who your friends are, that's who you are. So she said, stop hanging out with these bad kids over here. Who does Putin hang out with? Other dictators. Dictators from Iran, North Korea, China, Syria. That's pretty much it. Now, there's also some economic blocks that they're trying to establish, like the BRICS Plus, but they're not really helping in meaningful ways. Like, they're trying to shift to BRICS since they can't play in the European and North American markets anymore. They're trying to, but it's not really a great substitute. And the CTSO, that's the Collective Security Treaty Organization, where have they been? Now, that's supposed to be, these are former Soviet states that have decided that they still want to be part of Russia's orbit, but you haven't heard boo from them since Ukraine rolled over the borders into Russia. So how much of a collective treaty organization is it? And China is now the big brother. And we used to think, like, okay, Russia's the senior member and China's down here. But over time, as Russia has declined over time, China has kind of risen, just because in contrast, Russia has declined. So there's that as well. Now, then there's systemically. There's this real systemic problem in the way that Russia does what it does. And so what I mean by that is like authoritarian regimes have just a different character than a democracy, and that cuts both ways. It can be good in some regards, like it could be speed, but it also is bad in many other ways. So, for example, no freedom of speech. Like you can go to jail for holding up a white piece of paper with nothing on it at a protest, or if you say war instead of special military operation, that can be bad. And then no freedom of the press, no meaningful freedom of the press. Like they have RT and TASS and Pravda, but that's all state sponsored and everybody knows it. And you have a system where Putin, as a mob boss, has to keep his underlings happy. So the oligarchs have to get their due, and he's had uh, um, an agreement with not just the population, but with his oligarchs, like you can keep your stuff, but you stay out of politics and let me have this and you can have your stuff. But then when oligarchs' stuff is seized or frozen, he hasn't really been able to do anything about it. He's powerless to do something about that. Now, he can take hostages periodically and swap them, but that's a pretty small substitute for actually doing something about billions of dollars. Okay, and then so that's part of systemically. Then you have culturally. Now, culturally, there's a real dysfunction within the Russian system, and I mean significant dysfunction. So people are selected, it's not a meritocracy, they're selected for loyalty. And as long as you're loyal to the boss, you can continue to get promoted and move up and that sort of thing. But that loyalty, you can be incompetent and be loyal and still be promoted. And so that means that you don't have competence where competence is needed, and that becomes a problem. So you can have incompetent lackeys, and that goes all the way up and down the chain. And then you have corruption that's pervasive because everybody's looking out to pad their own pockets. And again, that goes up and down the chain, and to the degree that, like, we didn't know just how hollowed out the Russian army actually was by corruption, but it's significant. 20 generals are now on the dock for, well, in waiting for trials for corruption. And it was all okay until it wasn't. And so that's part of the system. And truth can't be spoken to power. And when you can't speak truth to power, you've got a significant problem in any organization or country or what have you. Okay, and then that leads to a place where practically the response to what's going on in Ukraine is going to be muted. It's going to be less powerful than it otherwise would be, and that's where they are now. So practically, what can Putin do? I don't know that he can do a lot. He's in a real bind. Like, he can't end the war and still stay in power, right? Like, he's not going to be Vlad the Great if he ends the war and then loses and has to pay reparations for decades and things along those lines. He can't win the war. If he could have won the war already, he would have won the war already. It's not like he's showing restraint like Doug McGregor or other repeaters will say. He can't declare that he's got a partial victory because they're in your territory. And you look feeble when they're in your territory and you're not marshaling an effort to do it, but you can't marshal an effort because you can't mobilize enough men to join the army to get in there. Because if you mobilize rather than just pay exorbitant fees now for contract soldiers, if you go to mobilization, another 500,000 men will try to flee the country. So, and then you also have, with the million men that fled the country, you have a crunch in industry, and so he's in a real hole. But all the way around, politically, militarily, economically, systemically, culturally, Russia's weaker than you thought. Okay, tell me what you thought about this. Am I off base on something? If I am, correct me, put that in the comments below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.